So we've got everybody on mute, but if you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function down at the bottom. You can also use the chat that Jacob just sent a chat to you all about to connect, to talk about, where you're from and what rivers you're working on, things of that nature. I'm also going to be live streaming tonight's event to Facebook just so we can reach a broader audience outside of just the TU universe. And start that now. But we usually get started just a couple minutes after the hour just to give people on the West Coast a chance to jump in. But it's good to see so many folks piling in here. Hey, Don from New York, good to see you. So have you met Don yet, Jacob? He's the new NLC. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, awesome. A lot of familiar names then. That's good. All right. We'll give it a minute or two, let some more folks come in, and then we'll get started with tonight's training session. Jacob, you can share your screen, right? I think, yeah, because you didn't make me host, you made me co-host, so we're good.
Correct.
Good. Hey, everybody, I see a few more folks have popped into the call. Thanks for coming to tonight's training on using the Spawning Red survey tool with TU. We do have everyone muted tonight just to get a good clean recording of this. We're also live streaming this event on Facebook. And if you have a question at any time, you can use the Q&A box down at the bottom. You can also use the chat box to kind of converse with fellow attendees and Jacob and Caroline throughout. One thing, if you do have a hearing impairment, we do have closed captioning on tonight. So if you would like to be able to have subtitles, it's a live transcript. If you look in the bottom taskbar, there's a live transcript button. If you select that, you can click the show subtitle option, and that will put subtitles at the bottom of the screen so you can more easily follow along with what Jacobs and Caroline are saying. So, all right. Well, with that being said, let me get us started, and then I'll kind of disappear and hand it over to Jacob and Caroline. I'm Jeff Yates, the Director of Volunteer Operations, and I really appreciate everybody diving in on tonight's training. This is one of dozens of events we're holding throughout Trout Week, which is our first ever online version of an annual meeting. We did it in partnership with Fly Lords. There's a lot of great activities and conversations happening throughout the rest of the week, including the annual membership meeting towards the end of the week. So please visit tu.org/troutweek or follow us on Facebook to find out more about events and activities that are coming up. One of the things I'm really excited about with our community science program as it's growing, especially led by Jacob and Caroline here in the Northeast, is it's a great way to engage larger segments of our population, of our communities in conservation. People who don't fish but care about local rivers can get involved, can go learn about the work we're doing on the streams, be part of the science collection that we do. It's a really great way for engaging people in that way. It's also a fun thing to do with families. So encourage your members and supporters in your chapter and friends and family in your community to get involved in these Spawning Red surveys and rivers assessments and other things going on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jacob and Caroline, and I'll be here, gang, just kind of in the background if you have any tech help issues, but you're kind of old hat at this point, so I'll leave it, you do it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Jacob Fetterman. I'm the project coordinator of the Bat and Kill Home Rivers Initiative. And Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Caroline Schaefer. I'm the field technician down in central New York, I guess. Mostly down on the East Branch of the Delaware.
Yeah, so for anyone in our areas that would like somewhere or wants to know where they should go do red surveys after tonight, you can reach out to either of us and we can steer you in the right direction. I'll start sharing my screen. All right. So yeah, I think everyone knows what they're here for. It is a virtual RED or spawning survey training. And Jeff mentioned that it's part of Trout Week this year. So it's exciting that we may have a bit broader audience than we would normally have. And so more so, I'm going to be talking about how you use the RED survey, which is an app on your phone, in order to collect the data that we ultimately will be using to prioritize projects, monitor the restoration success, and just build long-term data sets for our priority waters. But first, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about what a RED is and how trout spawn, as well as kind of cueing your eyes into what to look for and the different scenarios you might run into. So for anyone who doesn't know what a RED is, it's actually the spawning bed of a trout. And spawning is trout's form of reproduction. So that is ultimately what we'll be looking for. And on a spawning bed, if you're lucky enough, you'll actually see the trout there. And in the picture on the right, you can barely see the male in the background, but a nice big female brown trout on this RED. And so when you're walking along a stream to identify REDs, you'll hopefully eventually come across one. And so I hope that everyone could pick out the RED in this picture, but I'll give you a second to look at it. Yeah, but there it is. So very evident in this picture, cleaner gravel. And so you'll have clean gravel and typically elongate for especially brown trout REDs in the Northeast, that you have flow going parallel to the elongate RED. And so when you are thinking about REDs, there's actually parts to a true or complete RED. So a female actually begins by excavating what's known as a pit. So somewhere that she will ultimately end up laying her eggs to be fertilized then by a male. And so then after that happens, after a female has excavated a pit and is happy with the gravels that she's selected, then her and a male will actually spawn, and she'll then cover over those eggs. So to protect them, keep them down in the gravel. And so then you'll see what makes the RED an elongate shape is ultimately the tail spill downstream of the pit. So that is what you'll be looking for as a complete or true RED, one that has definitely had spawning within it. Then, so we're going to be thinking about where do we find REDs in a stream? So we already talked about clean gravel substrate. You're also looking for adequate depth. They're not going to be in very, very shallow areas. And they're typically glide into riffle associated, which I'll show you a diagram a little bit later as to how to identify what a glide is. But essentially it's where you're coming up out of a pool typically, and then it hits a riffle crest, and then you get the riffle down towards the next pool. The exception would be brook trout in particular will sometimes cue into spring seeps. So kind of the same idea though, in that it's an area where there's, in spring seeps cases, you have water upwelling through the gravel. So it is still providing good oxygenation and flow over those eggs to keep them clean of waste and well oxygenated for them to develop. So what are the objectives of doing RED surveys? Why should we go out this fall and wage miles of stream to identify what could be no REDs, what could be 40 REDs, depending on where you are and your timing? The biggest thing would be to inform management and steer restoration initiatives. So In some cases, you might be supplementing existing data. In the bat and kill, we're lucky now to have had a full year of data collected last fall. And so we ended up covering, I believe it was a little over 25 miles of stream and identified close to 250 reds. So in that case, we're building on that data set. We're going to repeat sampling sites this year in order to make comparisons, see where maybe trout are now selecting as opposed to last year, or areas that are continuing to be preferred spawning sites. And then we might do habitat assessments in those locations to see what are the cues for the trout that draw them to those areas, and how can we attempt to replicate that in our restoration efforts. And so we're identifying critical habitat areas, as I kind of just said, that the areas where there is no spawning are almost just as important to identify, because if we know it's a clean cold water stream, you might scratch your head and say, why wouldn't a trout spawn here? And then we can look at things in the habitat. Connectivity is a big thing. So is there a barrier downstream that doesn't allow passage so that trout can make it to this really nice spawning area? And yeah, what I just mentioned is monitoring project success. So when we think about reconnection, we also want to see, once we do a project to restore connectivity, that we ultimately then see spawning upstream, as we would hope when we do the project. And what do you need to participate in spawning surveys? If you're using the app, very simple. All you really need is a cell phone. And I'll be running through the app that you need and then the survey that you'll bring into the app in order to complete the surveys. And if you don't have a cell phone, that's okay. We have data sheets that can be printed out to be used. And in that case, you'll just need a couple other pieces of equipment in order to do the surveys. You'll want a camera and a GPS unit. GPS unit is used to collect the start end locations and anywhere that there is a red throughout the reach that you're surveying. Alternative to that would be just partnering with someone who does have a cell phone. And I'll suggest it later, but I think that's a good thing to do regardless, is to have a survey buddy, one or two people with you whenever you go out for safety, and probably a little bit more enjoyable to get out on the water with someone else. Other things that you may want and could, depending on your stream segment, make things easier for you. If you're floating reaches, obviously you would need a drift boat or a canoe. Waders, hip boots, or knee highs would work for most wadable stream sections. And other than that, polarized sunglasses help a lot. I'll show you some pictures later. I actually end up putting my sunglasses a lot of times over the camera lens when I take pictures, because it takes away the glare even for the camera to get a little bit better shots of reds as you're walking along the stream. Other suggestions: survey buddy would be great. That in the fall, you're getting into tick season again, so something to keep them away. Blaze orange to keep yourself visible to people out hunting. And flows, big thing. You want to make sure, A, that it's safe, and B, that you'll actually be able to see any spawning activity that might be going on. If flows are up, a lot of times the water might not be clear enough that you would be able to identify reds effectively. So I guess before I jump into this, is there any questions? I don't know if there's anything that's come into the chat while I've been rambling.
No, not yet.
Okay. So yeah, if anyone is planning on downloading the Survey 123 app and getting the survey on their phone through the presentation, I'll take my time through this. But the first step is to download the app. So for people with iPhones, you would go to the App Store, and anyone that has an Android phone, you would go to Google Play, and you would just search Survey 123, and this should come up, Survey 123 for ArcGIS. Then once you've installed it, hopefully most of you have already. See something in the chat. Okay, Carolyn. Yeah, so once you have it downloaded, you can open it. And if anyone already does have it downloaded, you can open it just to kind of go along with us right now. And once it's downloaded, you will probably see that it has an option to sign in. You never need to do that, and I would suggest not ever trying. It seems to be a roadblock if people get stuck trying to sign in. So you'll ultimately just hit the option to continue without signing in, and you'll be able to do everything you need to within the app without signing in. So step 2, you will either scan this QR code here on the screen or go to your phone's web browser and type in the following link. And so it's https://arcg.is/0u5vm. So a 0, not a capital O for that link. And once you scan this QR code or type in the link, you will have this screen pop up on your phone, and you will click on open in the Survey 123 field app. That brings in the red survey to the Survey 123 app. And so that's everything you need to then have the survey on your phone. Then I believe it's been a while since I've done it. I'm pretty sure once you hit open in the Survey 123 app, I'm pretty sure it comes up with the screen all the way on the left here already with the survey up for you. But if you're just getting into the Survey 123 app without going through the web link, then you should see all of the surveys that are on it. And mine here has the rivers as well, but you would see the red survey app as well now. And then once you click on it, you would see this mobile application to conduct red surveys in trout and salmon streams. And then before I continue on, it's also important to note that as you're wading streams, you definitely want to steer clear from walking over the reds. So pretty obvious thing, but just a reminder to definitely be careful and be cognizant of where you're stepping. So now, as you are completing a survey. So I have an example here set up. I don't think it might all be consistent, but so I set it up as though I was doing a survey on Camden Creek, which is a tributary to the Battenkill River. And so the first thing you'll do once you open the red survey within the app, you will enter the water body that you're on. So in this case, I put Camden Creek. Next is the survey date, which should auto-populate. If for some reason it doesn't, I think if you just click in that box, it should pop up with a calendar. If it doesn't have the correct date selected, then you just click on whatever day you're doing the survey. Same thing for survey start time. It should auto-populate. If for some reason it doesn't, just tap in the box and it'll pop up with the current time. Next field is participant names. So you'll enter the first and last name for each person conducting the survey, separating each name by a comma. So I just put in my name, Jacob Fetterman. If Caroline was with me, I would do Jacob Fetterman, comma, Caroline Schaefer. Then the next field is segment ID. If you don't know exactly what segment ID you're doing, I would say just do a descriptor of some sort for this one. And for most of them in the Bat and Kill watershed that I've been naming with segment IDs, I start with the number 1 for like the stretch that would start at the confluence with the river. So for that reach on Camden, that would start at the confluence, I named Camden Creek 1. And then you also have a segment description, and you should have the GPS coordinates. So if you don't have a known segment ID, it's not the end of the world. You could kind of make something up. And then you'll describe it. So for this, I put Camden Creek from mouth to Hickory Hill Road would be our segment description for Camden Creek 1. And then you'll actually get a GPS coordinate for your start location. So this is another thing. I'm pretty sure that once you open the app, it might actually put the coordinates from where you opened the survey or originally started the survey. So that's something important to note when you're out doing it. If you start the survey maybe before you're exactly where you're going to be starting it, to just make sure that when you're at the start location, you tap on the crosshairs here in the top left corner of the box, and that updates your location. And always good to double check that just to make sure that it got the right location. You can probably zoom in on this little viewer of the map and make sure that it's where it should be. Next thing is flow conditions. You'll select the description that best describes what flows are. So hopefully we see normal to low flows this fall. If you're seeing high flows, it's pretty doubtful that you'll be able to accurately pick out spawning activity. So I would even suggest, if you know flows are high, to kind of defer to a different day where it would be more normal or low. And visibility conditions, kind of the same thing. If you have high flows, it's probably going to be poor, but it could vary depending on the stream too. And next would be identifying actual reds. So you're walking your stream segment on Camden Creek and you come across a red. So your first red that you come across will be red ID number 1, and then so on. So you come across one, and then maybe you already see a second one. You'll do 1 first, and then your next one upstream will be 2. So same thing as getting the start location. For each red, you'll mark the location of it. So to make sure that the GPS coordinates are updated to where you are, I would suggest each time doing the kind of repetitive action of hitting the crosshairs in the top left here. That updates your location. You know it should be pretty much right where you are on that red. And so after that, oh, okay, it is this. Okay, so red type. I already talked about what makes up a complete red, but you're now selecting whether the red that you're observing is a complete or test red. So I use this picture again because I think it's really well defined. You have the obvious pit here and the tail spill downstream. So again, flowing water this way, pit and tail spill will be downstream. Now, if you come across a test red, how do you identify that? So you're still going to see cleaner gravel. The only difference really is that you're going to be lacking tail spill and roundish overall shape. So this one's actually from the Deerfield River. I stole it from a spawning handbook that TU put out a couple of years ago. But yeah, you see a little bit of clean gravel, but in comparison to the complete red, you don't see that it's very elongate. And so this is a spot that a female probably tested the gravels and didn't find them suitable to actually spawn in. So she moved up or down wherever she went and found somewhere that had more appropriate spawning gravels. So habitat types, this is what I mentioned earlier about pointing out exactly where you should expect to find the different habitat types. The three that are within the survey are pools, riffles, and runs. Then it has an option for other. I typically use other for glides, which are typically what you expect to see for especially brown trout reds. You expect that they would be within the glides. But on a normal stream, it doesn't go for all streams. You'll have a progression. So you'll see riffles into runs, into pools on bends where you have point bars, deeper water, and then out of the pool, it'll get shallower as it comes up to the next riffle. And in that transition from the pool to the next riffle is where you have the glide. And trout typically prefer these areas because you'll have downwelling of water. So as the water comes out of the pool, it's hitting this high point at the next riffle crest, and it's pushing water down into those gravels. So it's a perfect spot for trout to spawn. Their eggs will be well oxygenated, waste will be flushed off them, and they'll be pushed down into the gravels. So it's a very safe spot for a trout to make a nest. And the next thing is fish on a red. Before I jump into that, when you do select other for macro habitat type, I would suggest putting in your notes section for the individual red. That's down here. I would suggest putting that it was in a glide, or maybe it was in a off-channel spring seep. It could be anything significant about habitat type that you selected other for. Just make a note of it in that notes section. So then now we're to the part which is, are there fish on the red that you're recording? So if so, what species? If you can tell, that's great, put it. Otherwise, I mean, a lot of the reds that I identified last fall, I selected no fish. In a few rare cases, I was lucky enough to actually see fish on the red. So that's really neat. And if you get a picture of that, awesome. In this case, I was actually able to get a video of a couple of trout spawning on White Creek, or somewhere around spawning. And you can see nice big female brown trout. The male just swung in behind her. And so that's what you're looking for. If you can definitely identify what species of trout is on the red, definitely great information to have. Another instance, I used this in the training last year, and I just think that it's amazing, so I needed to share it again. This is a brook trout red in an AMD impacted stream. You see tires in the background. I think there was an oven or a dishwasher farther upstream, but in the midst of that, I came across this red and actually saw that there were two little brook trout on it. So just wanted to share that. And another example where if you can identify fish on red, really good knowledge. And also a good opportunity to point out that I mean, this stream isn't flowing very fast, but brook trout reds you also won't often see as elongate of a red. And as I pointed out earlier, they may even just cue into spring seeps. So brook trout reds, you may not see that elongate or oval shape where you have a really well-defined tail spill. But this is definitely what I would consider a complete red for brook trout. Then into your photo, I think that it's really helpful, especially for the bat and kill. Before I downloaded all of the data points from last year collected by volunteers, I actually screened all of them and looked at the pictures. So if pictures are high quality, it helps a lot for me to know that we can confirm that it's a red or not. So high quality pictures are definitely preferred. And I put up this picture because you can kind of see that there's a red in here, but not too super evident. And then I put the polarized lens from my sunglasses over the camera, and it highlights it a little bit better. So taking an extra second or two to get a high quality picture is definitely helpful to us. I already talked a little bit about adding to the notes section for individual reds. If there's anything of importance, then I would throw it in there. Maybe if you saw a fish kind of related to a red, I would put it in there, like maybe saw a brown trout swim off near the red, and that's just in case you have anything to add to what you've already given us through the selections above. Then, as I said before, you'll be numbering each red you're identifying. So you finished red 1. Now you're moving on upstream. You come across 2. You'll hit the plus button here to add your next red. And then you go through the same process. You number it 2, you select or tap that coordinate crosshair button to update your GPS location and fill in everything else. Then, so you made it through your reach, hopefully identified a lot of reds, and you're at the end. So you're gonna have an end time for your survey. Same thing as before. It should auto-populate once you get to it. Otherwise, just click in the box. It should pop up with the current time. And then you'll move on to the end location. Again, clicking on the crosshairs within that is the best way to make sure that your point is up to date. And then any notes for the end location. So I didn't put anything in here, but for this segment of Camden Creek, if it's Camden number 1, then I would put ended at Hickory Hill Road Bridge. So that would be the segment from the mouth all the way up to the first crossing on the stream. Then the last thing you got to do is hit the check mark at the bottom. If you're online, it'll give you the option to send the survey now. Otherwise, if you're offline, it does give you the option to continue the survey or save in the outbox. So for offline surveys, you won't have the option to submit them right away, but you'll save them in the outbox. And then later on, when you go to the app, when you're like back at home with Wi-Fi or somewhere that does have service, you'll be able to have an option to submit surveys that are stored in your outbox. And when I do surveys, I actually save all of them in my outbox, regardless of if I have service or not. I just like to do that as a way of kind of going back through, checking my GPS coordinates, at least of the start and stop before I submit them, make sure that all of the fields are completed so that the data is complete. If there's anything to add, I can add it right away and then submit them. And if you're on the field data sheet mode, you can reach out to me. I can send you this template, but it will be all the same information that I just ran through that is on the app. And here for other notes, I believe that, so I saw end location. If it isn't on the survey app, then I would suggest putting it wherever you can to put in some other notes. This is particularly important for areas that you may not have observed any spawning. So was the habitat viable for spawning? Was it silty? Was there no adequate spawning gravels? Was everything silted in? Was it too big of gravels, like more like boulders that trout aren't going to be spawning in? Next, were there notable disturbances? So is there area for stream restoration work to improve the conditions of that stream for spawning? And lastly, were trout observed not associated with spawning activity? So a good thing to note is if you did see trout but no spawning, then you might think, okay, well, they might be close. So if I come back in a week, then you might see spawning. Otherwise, it may be another cue as to the habitat conditions aren't quite there to promote spawning. And then once you're done with surveys, they go immediately, once they're submitted, at least they go up to this online red survey map. And you can scan the QR code. You could enter this link. Not sure if I can, no, I don't think I can grab it right now to put in the chat, but maybe Caroline can do that. But yeah, I'll share another screen. I have it pulled up, but it's really neat because you can see not just what you're doing for red surveys, but you're able to see what other people are doing in your area, what other people are doing in the region, and even nationally, reds that are being identified on streams all over the place. So give you a second if you want to pull it up on your screen at home, and then I will share another screen to show you how the map works. I believe you should all be able to see the map now.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. So maybe we should zoom into some in Caroline's neck of the woods. So it also does have the endpoints. So maybe, okay, here's red ID 3 from this survey, identified as a test red, macro habitat type, riffle associated, no fish were on the red. They don't have any notes. And should still be able to see my screen here. And yeah, in this picture, you can see somewhat clearly. I don't know if zooming helped at all, but you can see definitely cleaner gravel here. And that's really one thing I emphasize now is if you're walking a stream and you're really wondering if you're seeing reds or not, I like to say it's going to be pretty evident once you do come across a red. It's a pretty drastic difference in substrate color when you see an area that has been excavated and utilized for spawning. So let's click on another one over here. Red ID number 4, complete red, riffle, fish on red, no fish. In the photo. Okay, yeah, another definite red. Something to note, because it does look like this one's very wide. It's possible that this is two different reds. So if you come across an instance where you're positive that there's actually two reds right next to each other, which does happen actually more often than you might think, then you would do them as two. So you might have the same picture, or the picture might be a little bit different. But if you can identify two distinct reds with a pit and tail spill, then you can do, if it's your first two that you come across, do one as one, the other one as two. See what else we got on this one. Another complete red. It says it's in a run. It's no fish on this one, but yeah, definite red here too. So I'll let everyone else play around with the map if they'd like to. This also gives me an opportunity to grab the link. So that should be in the chat now for anyone who wants to access the map. And I wanted to show the data we extracted for the bat and kill last year. I put it onto a separate ArcGIS online map, and it has all our start end locations, some of them like these ones farther down in the watershed where we have start end locations, and no red circled in yellow or orange points. Those are ones where we didn't see any reds. These other ones are areas where we did identify reds. So click on a couple of these to show you what we have. Another example of a brook trout red. They're typically actually in pools or slower moving areas where you have upwelling. Another one here. That's a brown trout red. Another interesting thing I've observed, which you may or may not as you're out, is brown trout do kind of like to still be in areas where they feel safe. So not always out in open water, maybe very close to a bank, maybe associated with some overhanging branches, areas where they still can get away from predators. All right, so I'll jump back to the presentation. All right. So we already mentioned it, but to reiterate, if you are interested in getting involved but don't necessarily know where to start, please reach out to us, your local TU chapter, your local TU staff person, whoever that might be. We can connect you with the right people, steer you in the right direction. If there are already identified priority waters in your area, we can kind of push you in that way. Caroline already shared a couple opportunities coming up. I posted in here about the bat and kill watershed surveys. We have an in-person training and a group spawning survey day planned, both in November. And yeah, I don't know, Caroline, do you want to talk a little bit about your event coming up?
Sure. So the event is October 16th. It's going to start at 9 a.m. We're going to meet at the Catskill Fly Fishing Museum. And basically, we're just going to meet there, make sure everybody has what they need, understands how to use the app, answer any questions. And then we will head out we're going to go on to the Mongup, Frog Hollow, and the Willow Weemock. So we'll have maps and we'll split into groups for those. So.
Awesome. Are there any questions from anyone? I don't see anything in the Q&A. You can put them there if you have any other things, questions about where to go. You can drop them in the Q&A or the chat. My email's up here. We can get Caroline's out in the chat as well. I see Doug raised his hand. I should be able to allow you to talk, Doug. So if you...
There. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is, and maybe focused on the bat and kill a little bit, how many years, when you start a project like this, do you try to continue it for decades, or how many years till you think you have enough data to, or as your restorations go on, you just hope to see a response in more reds and greater fish populations?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say at this moment, we're kind of looking at it as we know that there have been spawning surveys done in the bat and kill in the past. I don't have all of that data, but we started off with a pretty good data set building last year. We hope to continue that, maybe not decades, but maybe we establish kind of a baseline of where things are at various locations. And then after maybe 5 years of that, we might scale back to more focused just on where we're restoring or where we're planning to restore. But
well, that was one thing that's always bothered me about Vermont. You know, when we look at some of the data that the fisheries folks turn out, they compare everything to a 1950 baseline, saying, well, the population of trout is as good as it was then. And I don't know who decided that 1950 was a great year for brook trout. As far as I understand, the history of the state is that we've already had major impacts in the 1950s from agriculture, sewers, and so forth. So and clear cutting of forests, that was probably one of the worst things that happened. You know, we were down into what, single digit or low double digit forest cover in the state compared to what, 75 or 80% today. So I just wondered why 1950 was so, you know, was anything great.
yeah, I would assume it's because that's when they had the data from, and probably when they had the most data.
So we may have improved since 1950, but we could still have a hell of a long ways to go to really crank out production in the streams. And is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the way that I've been looking at it is if we can do what we did last year every year, then that's awesome. I think that even this year we'll cover more ground. That was the first year we did it. So I don't see any reason to slow down.
Right. And the more data, the better. This weekend, we, you know, as part of the Trout Week, I guess we're still planting trees on.
Yes. Yep.
Cambridge.
On
Okay.
Camden Creek.
Camden Creek, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so we have 235 trees, some bare root, some potted plants, potted trees. Yeah, it's going to be exciting.
Be fun to see if fish are starting to run up the stream too.
Yeah, I'm wondering myself. I know that they're getting bigger and bigger. Seen some footballs being caught.
Nice.
Any other questions? Has anyone on the call been trying to use the app and maybe hasn't had success, that has questions pertaining to that? Not seeing anything. So I guess that's a good sign. Hopefully everyone's ready to go out and use it this fall. Yeah, so Doug mentioned maybe we'll start seeing some trout moving. I would say last year, the earliest I saw spawning activity was probably about the middle of October, which was definitely a much different year. This year has been wetter and cooler, so hopefully we will see fish starting to move earlier, but not a guarantee. I think typically you could expect for end of October, early November to be around the real kickoff to the spawning season. We have a Doug, is your hand still up?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that up in the high elevations, we've had some surprisingly low temperatures in the streams up there, down around 50 already. And some of the brookies we've been catching are a little larger, so we're kind of figuring that they're moving upstream and colored up pretty good too. So I think there's some activity starting anyway.
Mm-hmm. So that's exciting. Yeah, I'm sure in 2 weeks when Caroline has her event that there will be some movement.
Should be. Of course, they're a little farther south and lower elevation too. So it's kind of is it temperature and solar day length both that affect the spawning then?
Yeah, I would even say in some cases flow would regulate it too, but definitely day length and temperatures are big cues.
We've had a lot of rain our way this year, so it's really helped the streams a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing what water in the stream can do for it. Okay, Caroline, anything else to add, or we can adjourn?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Not sure if Jeff's on here, but if Jeff, anything to add before we wrap up? He's probably.
I could not find my mute button. Sorry. Awesome job. Thanks, gang. It was really fun to watch people on Facebook popping in and out, following in. I'm really excited to see this grow in the Battenkill and the Catskills and hopefully in some of the other streams. So thanks for taking the time to do this and to talk to people and share it with the broader community as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for setting it up, and thank you anyone from Trout Week that tuned in. All right. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Night, gang.
Bye.